The universe needed you to stop ignoring your calling, and it has been gentle, persistent, and patient in the way it nudges a life toward itself. You have felt that nudge as a kind of pressure that is not urgency but insistence, not panic but a steady, quietly insistent tide. That pressure sits deeper than fatigue. It is not the tiredness that a night's sleep fixes. It is the kind of weariness that whispers, over and over, that the script you've been running no longer fits the shape of who you are becoming. This is not a failure. It is a threshold. The heaviness in your chest, the low hum of disinterest, the small but constant sensation that something is off, these are not mistakes. They are signals. They are the universe saying, in whatever language it uses for you, stop delaying what you were made to do. You may have been trained to ignore those signals. Culture, habit, obligation, all of them conspire to make the familiar easier than the unknown. So you learned to keep going even when the fuel was gone. You learned to perform the role until the role started to feel like a costume glued to your skin. That is how the old matrix keeps its hold, by convincing you that what you are doing is the same as who you are. But you are discovering it isn't. You are discovering that the things you once did with ease now demand a price. You must pretend. You must size yourself down. You must swallow pieces of you to keep the narrative intact. And when the cost becomes too high, the cost begins to be paid in the currency of your attention. Less spark, more numbness, small daily resignations. That currency is precious. The universe notices when you stop spending it in ways that honor your essence. If you're listening to this, you have likely experienced some of the same signs many others do when they begin to outgrow a life that no longer fits. You will recognize them because they cut through routine and make you aware in ways that are both inconvenient and kind. One sign is the loss of automatic motivation. Tasks that used to happen without thought now feel heavy. You find yourself avoiding things you once loved, or doing them and feeling nothing when you finish. The autopilot that used to carry you has short-circuited. The engine turns over, but there's no ignition. This is not laziness. It is the body and soul refusing to be asked to perform for a script that no longer belongs to you. Another sign is social drainage. You notice that certain conversations exhaust you in a new way. There are people and places that require you to show up as an act, to maintain a version of yourself that is agreeable but hollow. These interactions leave you depleted, not because connection is painful, but because the connection asks you to become smaller than you are. That tightening in your throat after certain meetings, the desire to retreat to silence afterward, those are not personal failings. They are indicators that your field is changing. The old affinities no longer resonate. A third sign is déjà vu of emotional loops. You keep replaying the same patterns of disappointment, the same arguments or compromises that always end with the same hollow peace. It feels like being stuck in a corridor of reflections where every door opens to the same room. The repetition is not proof that you are doomed to repeat. It is a clue that your inner architecture is shifting and the old map no longer applies. You may also notice detachment, not a cold indifference, but a quiet unhooking. Things that once defined you begin to blur at the edges. Titles, roles, accolades that used to anchor you now feel like props. You could walk away and, in a strange way, breathe easier. That loosening is terrifying and holy at the same time. It is the space from which something unapologetically new can grow if you allow it room. All these signs point to one deeper movement: deprogramming. This is a process that is less dramatic than it sounds and more radical in its interior effects. Deprogramming is the gradual dissolving of an identity built on external expectations. It is the unlearning of the scripts you were given, the shoulds, the definitions, the boxes, until the core beneath them is visible and available. Think of it like a house that was once comfortable but is now constraining. The walls are the routines, the furniture the habits, the framed photographs the versions of you that were applauded. Slowly, with no demolition crew, but with friction and weathering, the mortar loosens. Doors that seemed permanently stuck begin to open. The lights flicker. The roof leaks in curious places. You feel the draft not as damage but as invitation. The leakage is a purification. Energy withdraws from the old house because there is no interest in sustaining what no longer aligns with your inner architecture. This energy withdrawal is not a punishment, it is a reallocation.
The life that no longer matters to you is not being spitefully removed, it is being freed so that attention can go toward what does matter. You can resist, you can cling to the old fixtures and attempt to patch what is meant to be remade. Many do. Resistance is understandable, it is the mind's defense against uncertainty. But every resistance prolongs the discomfort. The universe, in its patient insistence, will continue to redirect your attention until the old house is either renovated on your terms or left behind. You will also experience what looks like breakdown. The mind that once identified you by role, status, or predictable habits begins to panic because the scaffolding that supported identity is shifting. This panic is not pathological, it is a natural reaction to losing mental anchors. You might feel scattered, forgetful, unmoored. Decisions that once came easily now take so long you start to mistrust yourself. That mistrust is part of the churn. Be tender with yourself in these moments.
Breakdowns often precede breakthroughs. They are the clearing required before something new can be planted. There will be waves, not a single tsunami. One day you'll wake with a bright ribbon of clarity. The next you'll wonder if you ever made progress at all. This oscillation is not instability in the sense of failure. It is the system re-leveling itself. Imagine a forest after a fire. For a while, the scene looks broken and wild, but in the soil turned over by destruction, seedlings find light. The sacred void you are entering is that cleared ground, not emptiness in the negative sense, but a fertile pause between what was and what will be. Call it a cocoon if the image helps. In the cocoon, you are not yet a butterfly, but you are also not a caterpillar. You are in the transformational in-between, where the old form dissolves and the new begins to weave itself. It is disorienting because you were taught to value endpoints, graduation, promotion, marriage, retirement. The sacred void offers no tidy endpoint. It offers a remapping. Time feels thin there. Days can expand and contract with strange elasticity. You may encounter a whispered spaciousness and an urge to do nothing, which can be terrifying in a culture that prizes productivity above intuition. This is the right terrain for the soul to ask honestly what it wants next. It's a place where you can stop doing what you were trained to do and begin to notice what you are being asked to answer. The pull toward your calling will not always arrive emblazoned with certainty. More often it comes as a series of gentle clarities, a book that opens with a paragraph that pierces you, a conversation that leaves you buzzing for reasons you cannot yet name, a place that feels like coming home even though you have never been there before. These are the early signals of what the DNA of your future life may look like. The universe, or the larger field that orchestrates these nudges, is not shouting. It is arranging circumstances, caveats, and inner permissions in a pattern for you to recognize if you are willing to slow down and feel. The pull of the future self is subtle. It is a soft corridor of light, not a blaring horn. It tends to show up in three ways. First, through an increase in inner clarity. Small things begin to align in a way that feels like truth. You catch yourself thinking about a new way of work or a new field of expression with an odd steadiness. It is no longer just curiosity. It is a quiet identification. Where before ideas floated random and detached, now certain images and projects begin to feel like references to something already home in you. Second, through reduction of tolerance. You find yourself saying no more easily, not in rebellion, but in a way that preserves attention. That no is not an act of spite. It is a boundary that protects the fragile process of becoming. The future self does not demand bravado.
It simply requires less time being drained on things that obscure the inner signal. Third, through a series of micro-resonances, people who show up with the exact question you've been harboring, an online clip that clarifies a puzzle, a small success that momentarily proves possibility. These are not guarantees of a grand destiny, but they are confirmations that your field is shifting and that pathways are reconfiguring. As you pay attention, you begin to notice the difference between impulses born of fear and those born of calling. Fear-based impulses are loud, urgent, and often tethered to avoidance. Move fast, fix this, airlift the pain. Calls of calling are quieter. They are persistent without panic. They come with a deep, patient steadiness, and sometimes with a strange inner permission, an unspoken sense that this is the right direction, even if it is not yet fully mapped. You may wonder how to tell the difference. One practical way is to see what the impulse asks of your life. Does it ask you to expand, to create space, to say small, truthful yeses and nos? Or does it ask you to escape, to hastily repair, to replicate the past under the guise of novelty. The former tends to slow you down in the most honest way. The latter accelerates you toward familiar safety. Here is another thing to know. The universe doesn't always send spectacular signs. Often it arranges tiny, repeatable permissions. A podcast episode that lights you up, a person who plants a seed in a conversation, a single sentence in a book that jolts you awake. These are the breadcrumbs. If you learn to follow breadcrumbs, the path will reveal itself in pieces. Listen without needing the whole map. Trusting partial information is a skill in becoming. You can cultivate this skill by practicing noticing. Start small. Breathe and name what arises. Notice where your attention rests during an ordinary day. Which activities leave you feeling more awake? Which make your limbs heavy? Keep a journal of small resonances. 3 minutes of reading that feel alive. A brief encounter that sparks a thought. A place where your heart calms. Over weeks, you will begin to see a pattern. That pattern is the universe's handwriting on your life. Do not confuse this handwriting with certainty. The universe rarely hands you a fully spelled blueprint. It hands you invitations to try on directions, to test the waters. The future self is often best reached through experimentation, small, low-risk experiments that allow you to gather evidence. Take 1 hour a week to study what intrigues you. Offer your time to a project that feels meaningful without expecting instant transformation. Allow curiosity to be your laboratory. Let small experiments accumulate into credible data about what actually aligns. At the same time, be careful with busyness disguised as exploration. Activity does not equal alignment.
You can stay very busy stepping around your edge, putting energy into efforts that feel safe because they avoid real change. Alignment often requires stillness in the midst of movement, the ability to pause between tasks and notice which actions are enlivening and which are anesthetizing. There will be moments of quiet permission, a small flash of peace when you merely imagine a life different than the one you were expected to maintain. Those moments are not illusions. They are the future self offering a touch point. Cherish them. Return to them like a tide returning to shore. Over time, those moments accumulate and alter the coastline of your life. You may also experience what I call the soft refusals. These are not dramatic exits, but small withdrawals. You skip a meeting that feels pointless. You stop replying immediately to a social cue that used to command you. You turn down a project without spiraling into self-judgment. Each soft refusal is an act of conservation. It preserves the emotional capital you need to answer a calling when it becomes time to commit. All of this sounds spiritual because it is not merely pragmatic. It involves the center of who you are. But it is not some mystical bypass that ignores the material realities of life. Answering a calling does not require theatrical leaps into fantasy. It requires a gradual reallocation of resources, attention, time, community. It requires practical shifts that honor responsibilities while opening possibilities. The universe, in its insistence, will not ask you to abandon prudence. It will ask you to become wiser about where you place your attention. There is a science, or at least a craft, to carrying yourself through this threshold. Begin with 3 small practices that are simple and sustainable. First, quiet the day for 10 minutes. 3 breaths to come home to your body, then ask one question. What am I being invited toward? Let the answer arrive without editing. You will be surprised how often something useful surfaces with this tiny permission. Second, honor one no each week. Say it to a meeting that does not light you, to a conversation that requires you to perform, to an activity that uses time but pays only anxiety. Observe how the space created by that no feels in your chest and what it allows you to notice in the days that follow. Third, experiment in public in low-risk ways. Share a thought with one person. Create a small piece of work for a micro-audience. Volunteer a skill in a new context. Keep the stakes low and the learning high. These micro-experiments both reveal obstacles and create openings. They also serve as practice in tolerating the unknown and the potential embarrassment of small failure. The future self is not flawless. It is cultivated through iterative practice. If you are hearing all this and feeling a mix of relief and fear, that is normal. The call to a life aligned with your calling is as much about surrender as it is about courage.
It asks you to give up the comfort of certainty and trade it for a more honest relationship with possibility. That trade is terrifying and liberating, precisely because it brings you closer to truth. Now, before we continue, take a breath. If this is resonating with you, take a small, simple action right here. Pause and write one word in the comments that describes how you feel in this moment. Make it a single word, optional, private, and only for the sake of marking that you noticed. This is not performative. It is a tiny tether, and acknowledgement that something is shifting. If you choose not to, that's also fine. Everything here is an invitation, not a command. There is one more thing about the sacred void I want you to understand. It will ask you to become comfortable with being unknown to others for a while. New seasons rarely come with immediate validation. The first steps toward calling often look like small, quiet commitments that go unnoticed by the larger world. You might be the only one who sees the coherence in your choices at the beginning. This can feel lonely. It can also be profoundly clarifying. When the noise subsides, what remains will be what matters most to you. You will know why you made the choices you did, even if the outside world does not yet understand. That loneliness is not an indictment that you have failed to grow community. It is often the clearing where authentic community can later be built. The people who will eventually resonate with your calling are not always the same as the people who applauded your old role. Some connections will gently loosen, and some will be newly forged. Trust both moves as integral to the path. You are being asked to steward an interior revolution, one that unfolds in small, consistent choices rather than dramatic gestures. Think of it as a long conversation between who you used to be and who you are becoming. In that conversation, curiosity, compassion, and courageous honesty matter more than perfect progress. You do not need to have all the answers. You need practice in noticing, a willingness to test small possibilities, and the courage to say no to what drains you so you can say yes to what calls you. Even with all that, there is a moment the narrator in you is waiting for, a moment when you stand at the edge of the sacred void and decide to step in. That decision is not a cliff dive. It is a measured crossing. You do not have to leap without a rope. You can step, test the ground, and claim a small ritual to mark the choice. Rituals matter because they translate inner intention into outward evidence. They create a signature in your life that says, "This is the threshold I crossed." Many people choose simple rituals, lighting a candle and speaking an intention aloud, writing a one-line declaration in a journal, convening a friend to witness their first small commitment. These acts are not magical in themselves.
Their power is psychological. They transform vague wishes into a publicly remembered fact of your life. The universe often responds to that clarity, not because it is magic, but because clarity produces consistent action. Consistent action produces results. You might fear making a declaration because it feels like binding. It is, but binding is not always a restriction. It can be the structure you need to orient yourself. A chosen boundary can function as a compass. A single line, small, true, and personal, can serve as an energetic signature that marks the moment you decided to answer. Yet before you make any declaration, some threshold work needs doing. You must know where you are willing to revise and where you will not compromise. You must begin to clear small obligations that are not essential. You must practice small acts of alignment. You must learn to sit in the sacred void without collapsing into hurried fixes. This is where many stop, at the idea of revision. Change asks for rearrangement. People fear rearrangement because it disrupts more than one part at a time. But the rearrangement that matters most is internal. When your interior field is realigned, your outer life will follow in due time. The universe does not require grand gestures to confirm commitment. It requires consistent turning. Still, there will be moments when the universe asks for a clearer seal, a symbolic action that marks a deeper commitment. Some will prefer a private whisper, some a spoken phrase, some a small public announcement. The phrase itself matters less than the act of turning intention into statement. If you feel ready, you might choose a one-line personal vow. Keep it short, keep it true. That vow does not need to be the final declaration that seals your destiny. It can be the first intentional marker you place in the ground to say, "I am paying attention." Right now, you are likely somewhere between the first notice and that vow. You have glimpsed fissures in the old house. You have seen the beginning of a new map. You have felt the faint call of the future self. You have tasted the void. You are waiting to know how to move without abandoning prudence, how to be brave without being reckless. That waiting is fertile. As you stand in that waiting, there are practical ways to tend this in-between field so that when the moment to declare arrives, you do so from a place of resonance rather than reaction. Keep a small list of 3 things that feel aligned, no matter how tentative. Make them tiny and specific. Respond to one idea this week.
schedule 1 hour to learn. Say no to one draining obligation. These micro-commitments are how you train attention. At the same time, keep a notebook of small intuitive hits. The future self communicates in fragments. Write them down. Later, you will be grateful for these breadcrumbs, because they sometimes form a line of logic your mind could not see in the fog.
One more thing to name. Fear will show up as logistics. The mind will try to solve a spiritual problem with spreadsheets and contingency plans. That is not always bad. Planning is useful. But if you find yourself endlessly planning instead of experimenting, be suspicious. Plans can be a clever form of procrastination. The universe favors action that tests alignment, not perfectionist strategies that forever postpone engagement. So what does answering the calling actually look like in the near term? It looks like the patient reallocation of attention toward what resonates. It looks like small vows kept, small refusals respected, small experiments launched. It looks like a slow but steady composition of a life that reflects your interior state. It looks like courage practiced in increments. You are not being asked to become someone else. You are being asked to become more truly yourself. That is the work and the gift. The universe needed you to stop ignoring your calling, because your calling is not only for you. It is for the particular constellation of people, places, and possibilities that only you can reach when you are aligned. When you stop deferring that, you do not merely relieve yourself, you shift the field around you in ways you cannot yet imagine. And so you stand at the edge of the sacred void, feeling the draft from the house you have outgrown and the faint warm light from a corridor you are curious about. The choice before you is not binary. It is not leap or stay. It is to move with honesty, to notice, to experiment, to say small truths, to set a tiny marker that you are listening. You can proceed with practical care and soulful courage. There are moments now when the inner pull clarifies into a question that will demand an answer. The question can be simple. Will you stop postponing your attention? Will you begin in small ways to direct your life toward what resonates? Will you let the universe outmaneuver your business with patience and invitation? This is where we pause in the narrative, standing with you at the threshold. The air is different here. The sound of your own life is louder, and the echoes of the old house have faded to a low murmur. Ahead, the corridor of the future glows with a soft, patient light. The universe is asking for an acknowledgement, not an all-or-nothing vow, but a first small step that bears witness to your intention. Take a breath now. Feel the place where your attention rests. Notice the small signal that indicates a possibility. Keep that signal close. In the next part, we will step further into the sacred void and explore the exact kinds of small experiments that generate reliable data about calling, the inner map that shows where to commit more fully, and the precise kind of symbolic declaration that functions as a hinge for lasting change. For now, remain in the soft tension of possibility and notice how your body responds to the notion that the universe has been nudging you for a reason.
Feel into that soft tension a moment longer. Notice how your attention gathers around whatever is beginning to stir, not with urgency, but with a certain steady curiosity. The sacred void you're sitting in is not a waiting room for permission. It is an active workshop where the shape of what's next is being tried on, bit by small bit. If you lean a little toward it, you will find the work there is not mystical drama, but practical curiosity executed with tenderness. First, let me give you a clearer map of the in-between, because maps ease fear. The void tends to have 3 recurring textures. One is thinning. Priorities and attachments that once felt thick and vital now feel translucent. You realize you remember why you once did something, but the memory lacks the warmth it used to have. That thinning is a kind of pruning. It's not intended to punish you. It's calibrating the resources of your life toward what has greater coherence with who you are becoming. The second texture is testing. The world presents small experiments, invitations that look like coincidence, but feel like alignment if you pay attention. You will get a message, a meeting, or an offer that doesn't shout, but politely asks, "Do you want to try this?" Those prompts are the universe's way of handing you low-stakes opportunities to gather evidence. Treat them as laboratories, not verdicts. The third texture is thresholding. There are moments when the void asks you to mark a line. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as deciding to speak a truth you've been withholding, or to stop accepting an expectation that eats at your attention. That marked line becomes a hinge, a place where behavior begins to bend toward the future rather than away from it. Now let's talk about experimentation in practice, because the future self rarely arrives fully formed. It arrives through a sequence of small, testable moves.
Here are 5 experiment templates that are practical, low risk, and designed to produce clear feedback. 1. The 1-hour probe. Choose one topic that has sparked you lately. Commit 1 hour this week to deep, focused exploration. Read a short article, watch a video, interview one person in that field, or sketch an idea. At the end of the hour, jot 3 sentences about what felt enlivening and what felt flat. If you can't find a single hour, break it into 2 30-minute windows. The point is to get data, not to perform. 2. The micro offer. Offer a small piece of your work, time, or attention for free or for a minimal fee to a tiny group or one person. Teach a 20-minute session, make a short post that expresses a new angle, or craft a tiny product that represents an idea you want to test. Notice how it lands, who responds, what kind of questions arrive, who lights up. This reveals not only market interest, but also your own energy in sharing. 3. The boundary test. Choose one habitual yes that costs you spirit.
Say no to it for 1 week and observe what appears in the reclaimed time or attention. Do you feel lighter? Do you find a curiosity edging into the space? Does the absence create a new rhythm? This test helps distinguish obligations that sustain life from obligations that sustain identity. 4. The witness conversation. Find one person you trust and ask them to listen while you describe the pattern you're noticing, the thinning, the urges, the fears. Ask them 2 things. What did they hear that surprised them, and what appears to be the clearest next step? The outside perspective often accelerates pattern recognition and counters the isolation of the void. 5. The tiny public trial. Share one unfinished idea with a micro-audience, a friend group, a community forum, or a small newsletter. Frame it as a trial. Collect responses. Resist the temptation to defend or over-explain. Your skill in tolerating imperfect feedback is part of the growth. If the idea lights people up, note how it lights you up in return. Run these experiments as if you were conducting gentle science on your own life. Each will produce some form of signal, stronger clarity, a new boundary, a connection, or simply the realization that this direction is not yet right. None of these outcomes are final. They are informative. Over weeks and months, the accumulation of these signals forms an inner dossier that the future self uses to guide larger commitments. There is another practical layer to tending this passage: infrastructure for making small changes sustainable. Experimentation without structure quickly becomes novelty. To avoid that trap, put 3 containers into place. First, an attention container. This is a recurring, protected slot in your week, even 30 minutes, devoted solely to noticing. It can be journaling, walking, listening to audio that lights you up, or reviewing what you learned from the experiments. The job of this container is to collate the breadcrumbs into patterns. Second, a time container. Decide on a sustainable rhythm for your experimental work. It might be 1 evening a week, 1 focused morning every other week, or a daily 15-minute practice. The key is consistency that honors your responsibilities and your limits. Third, a community container. Identify 1 or 2 people who can hold you accountable in tender ways. Not cheerleaders who shout progress metrics, but curious companions who ask good questions. Community accelerates discernment. It also buffers loneliness. As you create infrastructure, there will be persistent practical questions about risk and responsibility. The universe nudging you toward calling does not absolve you from prudence. In fact, part of honoring a calling is stewarding what already depends on you: financial obligations, family commitments, and so on, with clarity.
That stewardship can look like staged transitions, saving a small reserve, shifting a limited number of hours, or negotiating new boundaries at work rather than abrupt exits. Think in terms of pivots rather than ruptures. A pivot realigns without burning bridges unnecessarily. Fear will show up, and often as logistics. The mind will want to quantify, to forecast, to run every worst-case scenario. Use logistics deliberately. Map real constraints and address them with practical solutions. But when planning becomes avoidance, endless spreadsheets that never meet the experiment, call the bluff. Ask yourself, am I preparing to move, or am I calibrating an acceptable stall? Another question you might wrestle with is, how do I know when a small experiment must become a sustained commitment? Look for a cluster of indicators rather than one signal. Does the experiment repeatedly produce a feeling of expansion? Are you finding energy for the work even when it's inconvenient? Are there emergent opportunities that build on the micro offers you made? Do people begin to seek you out for the specific thing you're exploring? When multiple signals converge across time, the case for a larger commitment becomes stronger. We should also talk about the social field, because answering a calling invariably changes your relationships. Some ties will loosen simply because they no longer vibrate at the same frequency. This is not always a collapse. Sometimes it's a natural pruning that makes room for new affinities. Other ties will deepen because they are elastic and can stretch with your growth. Be curious about each move. When a relationship loosens, ask what wants to be honored: the shared history, the care, the possibility that you simply don't travel that path together anymore. When a relationship tightens, celebrate the reciprocal nourishment. Boundaries will become your ally in maintaining these relationships with integrity. Boundaries are not walls meant to punish. They are gates that decide what kinds of exchanges are permitted. Practice clear, compassionate language, a short explanation, a firm intention, and an invitation for different kinds of connection. Example: I care about you and our history. I'm doing something different right now, and that means I won't be available for X. I'd love to find ways to keep in touch that feel honest for both of us. This kind of language keeps dignity intact while you shift. Let's address perfectionism and public image for a moment. The void often unmasks the fear that you might not look good while you're becoming. That fear can keep you performing the old script. A radical practice is to intentionally share incompletion. Post a sketch, tell someone a partial idea, or express a doubt in a conversation. The goal is not oversharing. The goal is to quit staging perfection as a prerequisite for growth. Vulnerability is not reckless exposure. It's the antidote to performative stresses.
Now, toward the hinge moment you sense approaching, the symbolic declaration. You don't need a grand liturgy. You need an act that translates inner intention into outer fact. A good declaration is short, present tense, and anchored in observable behavior. It might be a line you say aloud to yourself each morning, a sentence you write on the first page of a new notebook, a private letter folded into a box, or a small gathering where you tell one witness what you intend to try. The form matters less than the intention to make a seam between old and new. If you're ready for a seed phrase that functions as such a marker, consider this one simple line: I answer my calling. Say it slowly, with full attention. Speak it into your voice and then write it down. If you prefer a variation that leans more into unhooking the old life than claiming the new, you can say, I let go of what keeps me small. Either option works because both translate internal movement into an external marker. If you choose to speak the phrase aloud, do it in a place that matters to you even if it seems ordinary, at your kitchen counter, in your car, on a walk, and allow the words to settle. You might feel a small steadiness arrive. If you prefer to mark the vow visually, write the sentence on a card and place it where you will see it daily. Rituals need not be dramatic to be effective. They need to be repeated. Some will want to declare publicly. That's fine if it feels right, but remember, public vows can create pressure that distorts exploration. If your inner clarity is still forming, a private vow with one witness is often wiser. The aim is not to enlist applause, it's to create fidelity to a path of attention. After you make a declaration, private or public, follow it with an immediate manageable action. Tie the vow to a next step that produces data. For instance, after saying, I answer my calling, book that 1-hour probe, sign up for the micro-offer, or schedule the witness conversation. The declaration is a hinge. The action is the rotation that moves you through the hinge. One reality you must accept: the path toward calling is patchy and nonlinear. There will be days when doubt floods back, and the old scripts reassert themselves. When that happens, return to the simplest measures. Re-engage your attention container, review your experiment notes, and restate your small commitments. The work is iterative. Compassion for the self in the repetition is non-negotiable. Now, let's speak briefly about setbacks because they are inevitable and not evidence of failure. A perceived setback can be new information. Perhaps an experiment didn't land because the audience was wrong, the timing was off, or you misunderstood what energized you. Analyze kindly. What part was outside your control? What part is a skill you can strengthen? Reframe setbacks as course corrections rather than indictments.
This reframing keeps momentum alive and preserves emotional capital for the long game. There's also the matter of how you will know you're moving into alignment rather than just into another comfortable cage. Alignment is characterized by durability. The small choices that once felt brave become habitual because they genuinely fit. You begin to taste a steadier satisfaction, not flamboyant euphoria, but a sense of consistent rightness. Energy markets shift. You no longer need to muster enthusiasm as an act of will. It arises with less friction. That is the simplest litmus test. Before we close, I want to plant a few practical mini protocols you can adopt right now, immediate, tangible moves you can take in the coming week that respect prudence and generate information. Today, spend 10 focused minutes writing 2 lists: what you will not compromise on, values, non-negotiables, and 3 tiny curiosities you want to test this month. This week, pick 1 micro offer and 1 boundary to practice. Do them with the intent to learn, not to succeed spectacularly. This month, run at least 3 one-hour probes and record what felt alive. Share 1 small experiment with a trusted witness and ask for candid feedback. These are not formulas that promise a destination. They are disciplined invitations to notice what actually works for you. Over time, they create the evidentiary trail that makes larger commitments feel wise rather than reckless. As you do this, carry 1 quiet ethic. Choose alignment over speed. Alignment is patient. It may appear slow in a culture that equates motion with progress, but alignment accumulates in unflashy ways. Small, consistent acts compound into a life that fits. Now, if you feel ready to mark the moment, you may choose to make that symbolic declaration I mentioned earlier. It can be private, or you can share it publicly as a signpost. If you choose to take it public here and now, there is one simple, optional way to do it. Type the phrase, "I answer my calling," in the comments below as a personal marker. Do this only if it feels true and helpful. Do not do it to perform for others. Let it be a gentle anchor, a sentence that translates your inner movement into an outward fact. If you do not want to write anything, hold the phrase in your body and repeat it quietly to yourself. Either way, the action is a choice, not a requirement. The universe did not coerce you here, it invited you. You are deciding whether to step. Finally, hear this. You were never summoned to complete someone else's list. Your calling is not a box to tick, but a particular way of bringing your attention into alignment with what matters. When you stop ignoring that summons, you do something both intimate and important. You allow the unique arrangement of your gifts, your scars, your curiosities, and your care to meet the world in a way only you can. Go slow enough to notice, bold enough to try, and tender enough to forgive yourself.
Keep track of the breadcrumbs, run low-risk experiments, and build a small scaffold of habits that honors both your responsibilities and your longings. When you are ready, make a small ritual. Say the line, write the note, tell 1 witness, and then do the next practical thing. The universe needed you to stop ignoring your calling. You've been called. You are answering. I answer my calling.